It's so brilliant we can all connect like this. I know it's challenging times for everyone, but it's just really lovely that teachers can come together and share ideas like this. So I hope we get some nice chat going and nice ideas from today, and looking at something that I think concerns us all. So I'm just going to go through, the main points that we're going to look at today in relation to using coursebook material, and how can we use that coursebook material to help us with formative assessment in the classroom. So I think the first thing that we've got to look at, we can talk about this together, is what are we aiming to assess when we assess young learners' writing? And I really mean specifically young learners as opposed to writing in general. So we want to focus on that because we know our young learners are coming to this in a slightly different way from sort of older learners who've been in school a while. And then we're going to, before we look at examples, we're going to look at what are the benefits of exploiting our coursebook material. I mean, almost all of us have to use a curriculum, a coursebook, some tasks, and we tend to just, go through the units and then we're moving on to the next unit. But today we want to look at how we can really take some of that material and exploit it a bit further so that it's very helpful to the students, and also it's better for you as a teacher because hopefully it involves you in sort of less preparation or worrying about what you're going to present the students with when you're trying to assess their writing. And then the bulk of the session will be, how can we exploit this material? So we will look at some examples, and obviously you've got your own classes and your own experiences, and the examples are not set in stone, but they're to give you some ideas to play with as you go back to your course books and think about your young learners. Okay, so first of all, let's think about what are we aiming to assess in writing. Now, up here, I'm going to put, I put a list there. You might not agree with it. I'm not saying it's, nothing's absolute, is it? But what I put down there are the typical things that we see that we normally assess in writing, or certainly summative exams or little exams that students might do. These are typically the kind of things that we're asked to assess. But I want you, Emily's going to bring up a little box now, and I want you to consider this question. Are all of these appropriate to young learners? Now, in your head, I want you to look at that list and think about why not, might some be, but I want you to tick everything in the list where you think it's appropriate to assess a young learner on that feature. So, for example, if you think, yes, it's very important they know how to organize their writing, I'm going to assess that, then you put a tick for organization, but you can put as many ticks as you want. So could you start thinking about that, and then we'll see what everybody thinks. Emily, is this okay?
Yep, the poll's up and running right now.
Okay, I can't see it, that's all. Yeah.
Oh. It should be a little poll box that appears, but I can read what's winning right now. We have vocabulary with 85% of the vote, grammar at 64. Looks like length is pretty low. And complexity / length of sentences is lower too. Not checked as much.
Okay, shall we close it? So what was the winner there, would you say? Oh, there we are. I can see.
Good.
So most of you said you're going to assess vocabulary, and there's vocabulary and grammar come out very, very strongly as being something that you can assess in the writing skill. Now, I understand that's necessary, especially in some contexts. But I'd like you perhaps to have a little sort of rethink about that, perhaps have a little shift around in your head about it, because of course we do a lot of grammar and vocabulary, you know, when we're teaching them and we have exercises and they're practicing grammar and vocabulary. And I would like to suggest to you that with young learners, maybe we shouldn't, when we're assessing writing, which is communication, that perhaps we shouldn't be quite so focused on grammar and vocabulary. Perhaps we can prioritize other features. Now, there's a reason for this, which is that grammar and vocabulary tends to be right and wrong, and you end up in this sort of scoring situation of what's right and what's wrong. And most of us know that young learners like to have success. They like to get something right. They like to be good at something, and we want to encourage them. So I wonder if we ought to sort of think about how we can refocus things a bit to give them, to build the confidence while they're going through these early years. So from very young up to say 10, 11-ish, how we can build their confidence. What worries me slightly is if we're always focused on the grammar and vocabulary, where do we focus on the writing skill, the communication, which is what we're trying to build, because of course, cognitively, they're still learning this in their own language. And it's something we want to make them sort of aware of, I think. So let's just have another look at, I think we can take the poll down now, Emily, thank you. Sorry. So let's just take a slightly different stance on this and think, which features can we assess in young learners? So let's just think about some of the background of young learners, what our young learners are like, and see if that helps us kind of refocus how we're thinking about it. Now, something which some of you may be familiar with, which we talk about in assessment, is a theory called bias for best. And bias for best means that you structure a task, in this case, a writing task, and the criteria that you're going to use to assess so that it's best for the student. You give them the best opportunity to win. So, for example, in a test that is bias for best, what we often have is a situation where the test taker, the student, is allowed to prepare something before the test, because that gives them a better chance of success. So that's what I mean by bias for best. So let's try and keep that in our heads as we go through. The other thing, of course, you're all aware of is, you know, with very young learners and young learners, is we must be really careful to protect their self-esteem. We don't want to be giving them negative kind of feedback that's going to damage their confidence and their self-esteem, both in English, in their English language learning, and in themselves. And then I've also mentioned we have to think about their cognitive level. What can they cope with? Do they really understand that things have to be absolutely correct in grammar and vocabulary when they're writing? You think about the little notes and scribbles they do in their first language. Quite often that might have mistakes in it as they're learning their first language, but they're communicating. There's a purpose to their message or their little note they write their mum or their friend or whatever. And that's what's important. That's what's at the front of their mind. So we want to use that and not discourage them from doing that. And this comes on to my last point, is obviously, it depends what age group you're teaching here, but it depends on their relationship with their first language. How much writing do they see or have they done in their first language? What's their connection with that writing? What kind of writing are they doing? And I think that's really important, because I think sometimes in summative assessments and sometimes in books, we're asking them to do writing that might not be part of their real experience in their first language, but we can use course book material to fill that gap. So I'm just going to give you some suggestions about other things you might want to think about that you can assess when your students do a piece of writing. Now, you're not going to assess everything. I think that's really important. Children can only cope with sort of one or two key features held in their head. So you've got to make a decision about what it is you want to focus on and how you're going to build it up. And some of you have said, you can be positive about grammar and vocabulary. Of course you can. I'm not disputing that. I'm not saying don't do it. I'm just saying, let's have a little think about what else we can incorporate here. So now, something you might want to reward them for, given it's writing, is how fast they do the task, whether that's a good thing or not. It's up to you and how you teach them. But you don't have to focus just on the writing. You could reward them for doing the task in a very good time. You can reward, there we are. You can reward them for their attitude. Are they enthusiastic? Are they positive when they're tackling the writing task? Are they trying to do their best? These are all things which what we want to do is encourage them with their writing, because writing is such a challenge for young learners, and we want to always put them in this positive place. You can reward them for the number of attempts they make. And it's not that they have to do things in just one, in one. Sometimes it's good to do things 2 or 3 times and make it much better. So you decide in your class what you're trying to teach the learners, how you're trying to help them. And you might say, well, you did 2 attempts, so that's great because you tried to get it better. You're not just sort of dashing it off and leaving it there. You might want to reward their ability to improve. I mean, we will look at some examples about how we can repeat tasks for success for this bias for best. But another criteria you could assess them on is their ability to make things better, so that they're encouraged always to amend things for the best version. None of us write our best version first time round. So we're trying to help them with these learning skills within their writing. You might want to reward them for their use of wider knowledge from the outside world. What did they bring to the piece of writing? What extra information did they add in, or did they just do it very mechanically? So I'm not trying to suggest that you would only pick one of these, or that you would ditch the more traditional criteria for these. But what I'm saying is these are opportunities to think about how you can focus on bias for best and reward learners, even if they're struggling, sort of especially in a mixed ability class. So let's then go on to think about the next sort of stage of this, as it were. So we've thought about what kind of things we can assess, what kind of things can we comment on. So let's think about why we're suggesting to you that it might be a nice idea to exploit coursebook material to help with assessing writing. Well, of course, one of the obvious things is familiarity. So, for example, if you've already done a little activity in the course book that's grammar or vocabulary or something, the students are very familiar with it. So they don't face that extra challenge of, oh, now write about this different situation, but with these words. They're looking at something that they're already familiar with. And children like familiarity. They like a challenge, but they like to feel on top of things as well, that they understand things. I would say the other advantage for you as teachers, and obviously you'll be able to do this yourself, but we're looking at sort of also time saving, is the tasks in the course book have already been leveled and selected by an experienced team. So you can probably trust that, you know, in exploiting that activity in a different way, you're not also going to be trying to work out what the level is and have you got it right, and are you maybe is it maybe too difficult for some children and not for others. So we know that the level is right. And the other thing is something I've touched on before, which I'm sure many of you have found, which is with young learners, obviously we know repetition is very important. It's not just repetition to embed that learning, but it's very good for success. You know, children like redoing and redoing things and being good at it, as I say, and being, you know, on top of the situation that they're being presented with. So I wouldn't worry that, for example, you know, you think, oh, but we've already done this, they'll be bored. I don't think that's true. I think they like, you know, repeating things and knowing, yes, I can do this. I'm rather brilliant at this. The other thing is, if you're looking at, say, and we will look at examples of this, if you're looking at, say, how you exploit vocabulary and grammar, you know, into activities into a writing task, is what's good is it really helps them see the relevance of what they're learning. So rather than looking at, I mean, obviously all course books try to contextualize the learning, but you can only put so much on the page. So this is another opportunity for the students to see the relevance of the vocabulary and grammar they're learning. How can they apply it? And that will also help them remember it. And that leads into my final point about this, which is, you know, obviously throughout their education, what we're trying to teach are transferable skills. So we don't want them to do, you know, new learning in an unconnected way. We want them to think, what are all the different ways I can use this? So, for example, in a course book, you'll be presented with some vocabulary as an activity. The students will do that. They will have 2 or 3 post activities, but using that for writing gives them yet another opportunity to see how this learning that they're doing applies in a much wider way. So those are, you know, obviously you will use different assessments for different things, but here we're just focused on how we can take that course book material and see if it can help us with writing. Okay. Now, I would argue, and we've talked about this in some of the assessment webinars I've done before, I just quickly want to go through this. And most of you, I'm sure, will, you know, I'm sure I'm preaching to the converted, as they say in English here, but let's just make sure we're all on the same page with this. I would argue that you know, when we're trying to get young learners to do writing, as we said, it's a challenging skill for them, partly because of how far along they are or aren't in their first language. You'll probably find in your classes there's a big difference between all the students in the class of what they can cope with. So it's nice if we've got a little process that makes sure that the students are put in this best position. So remember, we're doing bias for best. So we want to put them in the best position before we assess them. So let's just have a look at this process. And I say that Emily said you will, you know, you'll get copies of this. So let's just focus on talking through this. So first of all, you need to decide, and I cannot stress this strongly enough, what your need or purpose is. So let me take an extreme example. If you decide that you want your students to do a piece of writing, maybe they're writing to make a plan, they're writing a message or an email to make a plan with a friend, a very short, simple writing task. You're going to meet at the weekend. So you want them to write a little note about meeting. Now, your purpose there is, or should be, to make sure that their message is clear for the person receiving it. It's very, very easy when you see their work to start worrying where they've got the spelling wrong or the grammar wrong. And this is what I mean. But that's not what the purpose is. Your purpose, if you have to maybe write it down, we all forget this, write it down at the beginning to remind ourselves, our purpose is, does the reader understand the message? And that is what we should be assessing the students on, not worrying about their, you know, small spelling mistake, or they've got the grammar in the wrong order, or maybe they've, you know, put an additional bit of information in or something. So I think, you know, when you're looking at your assessment criteria, you definitely want to match it with your purpose. And so that's my next thing. So first of all, you've got your purpose, and because of your purpose, you can decide your criteria. You know, maybe your purpose is, I want them to do this piece of writing because I want them to do it 2 or 3 times to improve, in which case your criteria are based around that. Okay, so it's all about this. Make sure you have a very clear match between your purpose and your criteria. And the children don't understand the terminology here, but they do understand when you've told them to do something and if they've done it and what they're being judged on. So we can't go off-piste on how we're judging things. Now, depending on the age of your students, but I think you can do this actually quite young, share that purpose and the criteria with the children. Make sure they all understand. This is why you're doing this. This is what's important. This is what the focus is. And this is what I'm going to give you a mark on or assess you on or whatever. The next thing before any writing task, I know you all know this, is very important to allow oral planning. Young learners are oral before they do writing. And so we have to give them plenty of time to speak around what they're going to do, what they want to do, what their plan is. Even if they, you know, get a bit muddled about it, that's all part of them making sense of it and the shape of it. So make sure that you're not rushing, oh, here's a writing task for homework. Make sure that you can plan in time for them for this oral planning, whether that's with you as the teacher or with them together as they get older and they can do that. Now, the next thing, which, you know, I think sometimes people think goes against the grain, but I mean, I think our world is changing. We're becoming much more collaborative, much less selfish, as it were, about our ideas, especially in the classroom, is I think let's share ideas across the classroom. So they've had that time for oral planning, but we still need to reinforce it because they're very young learners. So let's share all the ideas around the class. What did you decide? What did you decide? So everybody contributes something. So they feel their contribution is important, but at the same time, they can see what the other students are thinking and what their ideas are, and they can learn from each other, and that will filter back into their own plans. So I think we have to, where possible, make sure everybody shares ideas so that you kind of end up with this sort of best version of things. Then you would ask the students to do the task, whether that's in class, at home, whatever. And then this is for teachers. Only assess according only to what you agreed in number 2. Don't try to add in other things at the last minute. As some of you have said, we've discussed this before actually, some of you have said some may copy others. You know, some students learn, young students learn by copying. They start off until they're about 7 or 8. They copy each other, they copy adults. I think we've got to be less worried about copying because copying is part of learning. And if it may make them feel more secure, there may be a reason why they're copying, and you can dig into that as part of the assessment. But I've just got to move on because we've got to get through quite a lot of ideas here. So now, after you've looked at this or assessed it or given them a grade or comments on it, please try and ask the students to repeat what they've done, because the second time they will do it better, and you can give them a better mark, and it means they can have in their portfolio or inside themselves, they go, I've got a successful version here. And I can't emphasize how strongly for young learners, they have to have that picture of success. They have to know they can be successful. So maybe you don't want to do it at the same time. I don't mean go away and do it now. Maybe a week later, maybe a month later, you say, let's do it again and do it better. So that's just a little process you can go through as you're introducing. But let's now look at some ideas. I'm just going to go through. I mean, what I've done here is the book that I worked on with National Geographic is called Look, and it's got 6 levels, which is quite common to have those 6 levels for primary. So I'm going to be using examples from Look, but you will be able to apply this to your own level and your own books. Somebody's put in the chat box, make sure they're copying the right person. That's a very good point. I like that. That's true in life for all of us, isn't it? Anyway, so to look at the examples, I'm going to start with level 1 and just go up the levels, but these activities are not tied to a level. It's just to try and give you a mix of ideas so that you can hopefully adapt for yourself. So now the first one here is this little shot you can see of listen and point. That's a vocabulary exercise to teach them those phrases. So let's imagine you've done that page, you've done that vocabulary, you've done the teaching the vocabulary part of the lesson, as it were. And then later on, I don't know, maybe later that week, maybe in another week, you're going to use this to do a little writing assessment with them. And what you can do with this is ask them to write. So you're going to say, remember I said it's purpose. So here you've decided your purpose is the audience. This point I was saying, are we getting our message across? So you could ask them, for example, to write a 2-line dialogue. Can you fly a kite? No, I can't. Let's go and fly a kite, whatever. So the 2-line dialogue could be, the reason it's writing is it could be a little text message between them, or, something, a little play that they're writing to act out. It's still writing, but they're very, very young at this level 1. Or you could, you're going to have grammar that you've already covered in the book, like can you, as I say, or let's. But remember, you're focusing on the writing, not on, the minutiae, as it were. So, for example, if they misspell paint a picture, that doesn't matter in the writing exercise, as long as you can understand what they're trying to say. You may want to go back and redo some of the vocabulary if you feel they haven't got the spelling right, but at the moment we're focusing on writing. So let's not get sidetracked by spelling, for example. You can obviously give them prompts as ideas. They can do this orally in class, and then they're going to sit and write it. And this is what you might want to, of course, I'm not saying you have to, this is what you might want to assess. So, for example, you might say, right, what I'm going to see is, can you, obviously you wouldn't explain it in these words to them, but can you write this dialogue so that it links, so that it makes sense? Because that's what you're testing. Can they do writing that's got a thread to it? That's if you've got quite a good class. You might simply want to assess them on their ability to improve. So you might ask them to do it, and then you might ask them to do it again and just say, yep, great. You've got grade A on your ability to improve. I'm so glad you've done it better, so that better is a good thing for them when they comes to writing. Then I'm sorry, again. So now I'm just looking at level 2 here. So there'd be maybe about 6-ish or whatever, 7 in a lot of countries. And how can we use grammar activities? So again, I've got a little shot here. This is a grammar activity for is there, are there, is there any, are there any, no, there aren't. So again, imagine you've done the grammar activity, they've done the work on the page to focus on the grammar. And you want them, later on to do some writing for it. So maybe what you want to focus on here in a very low level is the beginning of creating stories. So the activity is, they've got a lot of detached sentences here with are there, is there. You could get them to make those detached sentences into a story about, there's a little 1 in 4 there, but it doesn't have to be with what's your meal. Sort of, is there, they could answer all the ingredients. Is there any chocolate? Yes, there is. Is there any milk? Yes, there is. Is there any, I don't know, eggs? Yes, there are. Let's make a cake, for example, so that you get a little story, a mini sort of 4-sentence story. And again, you're not going to worry about have they put is there or are there in the right place. What you're worried about now, what you're focused on now, is them connecting the story. So what you might want to assess, their at this low, how their legibility, how they're writing. You might just want to be focused on that, and you're using this as a vehicle just to focus on that. Or you might, if it's a story, to assess them on the order of information. So again, it doesn't matter if they've made a little vocabulary or grammar mistake. What matters is, does the story make sense? Does it go 1, 2, 3 or 1, 2, 3, 4 in a logical order, so that you're encouraging them in these learning to learn skills. You're encouraging them in metacognitive skills to think about the wider approaches to writing rather than just spelling or whatever. I'm not saying on another day you might want to do spelling, that's fine. I'm just trying to give you some alternative ideas here. So moving on to level 3, so they're a little bit older here. And we're looking here at a reading activity. So again, here's a typical sort of reading activity from a course book. You've got a little text, and then they have to read the text and show that they've understood it. So you've done that activity in class, they've done the text, they know, you know, they know what they're doing. Now, this is an ideal opportunity for something that they are going to have to learn very quickly and continue throughout their educational, educational careers, throughout their education. So what I want to look at now from this level onwards are integrated skills, which is what, because aside from messages, we hardly ever do writing that isn't connected to something we've read, something we've listened to, or some speaking we've done. So let's look around that. So here we can look at reading into writing. Now, as they're a little bit older, an activity you might want to do here is you might want to say to them, right, close your books and write notes of all the things you can remember from that text. Just randomly, notes, okay? Important they learn to write notes. You could then ask them to put those notes into sentences. So you're not asking them to do too much at once. They're doing things in stages, and the stages actually reflect what we would do. You know, when we read something, we make notes and then we write something from it. Then you might ask them to put those sentences in order, and then to check that with another pair. They should be able to do that by this age. So you're teaching them this writing skill of converting notes into sentences. And what's important here is the ordering, and the checking with another pair is that collaborative idea that, oh, maybe somebody's put it in a different order. Or maybe somebody's put more information in than I put in. And so you might want to assess them on speed. How quickly did they do it? That can be a good or a bad thing, depending on what you're teaching them. You might want to check their ordering of information, their organization, which we had as an assessment point at the beginning. Or you might want to check how complete their notes are. And I don't mean accurate necessarily according to the reading, but, you know, have they just still written notes, or have they actually tried to make sentences? Now, I'm not suggesting you assess them on all 3 of those things. It's too much for young learners, but you can extract one of those things and say, right, this is what I want you to do, and this is what I'm going to assess you on. And it might be the ordering, for example. So let's look at another integrated skill. So here, again, very typically, we're looking at listening. So you've done a listening activity, you've done that little conversation in your lesson as usual, and you've done the comprehension on it, and etc. And we're going to look at how we might convert listening into writing when you listen to something and then you have to write about it. So remember I said that oral preparation was important. So what you might want to do first of all here is get them, this particular example I've chosen, which is about a teacher using a robot. As I say, you will be able to convert things for your own situation, but you could ask them to act out what's going on there. Now, I don't mean act out the script. I mean a sort of practical acting out. So where is the robot? Where is the teacher? Where are the students? and what's the teacher doing. So they're acting out the mechanics, not the dialogue, as it were. And this is important because it gives them a visual of what's going on here, because a physical sort of visual of what they're doing. And then what you could do is ask them to write the instructions for using the robot. So this script is just discussing the robot and how amazing the robot is. But you're going to take the same information and convert it slightly. And they're already familiar with it. They've acted it out, so they understand what's going on. They've got a picture in their head. Then you're going to ask them to write the instructions. And of course, the sort of things you would want to assess there are the clarity of their instruction. Is there too much information or too little information? The ordering of their instruction, or the completeness of their instruction. Again, they're a bit, you know, they're level 4 now. They're sort of about 9-ish. So you might want to assess 2 things there, but I still wouldn't assess too much. But then they've taken something that they've listened to and they've made it very, very real for themselves. And they're going to be successful because they understand the script. They've already done it. They understand what's going on. And it, as I say, it teaches them how we might genuinely in real life listen to something and then convert it into instructions. And then, sorry, and then the last integrated skills thing here, I think this is, we're moving into level 5 now, is how we convert speaking into writing. So again, very, very common, somebody speaks and then you want to write something about it. So what I've taken here is from a look level 5, and this is a sort of chant where they're learning about possessions and things like that. So it's a chant sort of performance thing that they're doing that's speaking. Now, an activity they could do from this to convert into writing is they could write a poem. So let's think about this. So in the book, they're going to do this activity in class, which is speaking. And I think there's also a little follow-up activity where they write a description of an object that's very important to them. But what about having a different slant on this? And this is what I mean about transferable skills, about taking the same thing and putting it in lots of different contexts so they can see how it works. They could easily do a nice poem from this. They could choose, you know, which they have to do as part of this activity. They could choose the object that's important to them. Think about where it comes from, and then can they think of rhymes, you know, depending on what poetry you've done with them. Can they think of words that rhyme? You might have done something with them on rhythm, and you want them to write the poem and it only has to be 4 lines. We're not looking at a massive poem here. It could just be sort of short 4 lines. They could read it to others. Maybe they want to go back and change it and edit it after that, get them used to editing. They could chant the rhythm. You could have a poetry slam where they could do the writing and then all perform in class. And the kind of things you might want to assess here are their enthusiasm for doing this, or their collaboration with others. They have their own object they're going to talk about, but they can work together to help each other. Oh, this rhymes with this. So this is what I mean about all the oral planning they do beforehand. You could reward them for the number of attempts. And again, for their wider knowledge, what do they know about their object? What are they bringing to that writing activity? What do they know about poetry? All children have done poetry from when they're babies. What do they know about poetry that they can they can bring to this and transfer to English. So again, you're not worrying about their grammar. You might not be worrying about their style of writing. You're worrying about, have they got this genre right, this context, this type of writing? And then finally, this is level 6. Something else which is certainly in look and is common in a lot of course books is you might, so I'm just keeping an eye on the time here, you might want to take the functional language, and which is often used for speaking, but remember there's functions in writing as well. So I'd put down that your focus here is going to be context, and they're doing wish. So you might want them to write a wish story of their own. Something personal to them, what they would like to do but can't. Why can't they do it? Can they explain that to somebody else? Can they explain that feeling or that story to someone else? And can they write it down? And they can tell their stories to each other. And again, here you can assess their logic. Does the wishing connect properly? Have they explained their reasons? Because now, level 6, they ought to be able to start to give reasons and examples for things. So you're looking at a more holistic picture. Have they linked their ideas, or how fast did they do something? Did they do this? Okay, so as I say, those ideas not set in stone at all, but I hope just to spark your imagination of how you can think around things, this coursebook idea stuff they've already done, so they're very familiar with it and you're exploiting it a bit further. So let's just go back and look at, now you might not agree with this, I'm not saying you have to, again, not set in stone, just some ideas. Let's look at those ideas we had right at the beginning. So at the top of the table there on the left, you can see the traditional writing feature assessments. And then there's a bit of a gap, and at the bottom of the table are the more sort of holistic approaches you might want to take for young learners. And I've just given you some ideas there because you've got to think of the match between your criteria and the task you're giving them to do. Okay, so for example, you're not going to assess organization in a piece of writing that's random or doesn't have organization to it. You're not going to sort of assess appropriate to read if they're maybe writing to themselves, things like that. So you've got to think about that. I've just put some suggestions in there of how you can connect. So for example, for appropriate to the reader, we've got messages and emails, because that's super important. Organization is for stories, narratives, dialogues, so that everything goes in a nice logical order. But you can see in the middle column where I put suitable for young learners, this is just my personal opinion. I'm happier when we're looking at, as I say, these more holistic, achievable things than worrying about vocab and grammar, and which we can assess in other places. We can get right in other places. So, as I say, you'll get copies of this, so hopefully you can think about it in your own context. And so let's just go through a summary, because we're coming down in time, as it were. Yes, you are going to get copies, so panic not, as they say. So let's, oh, help, sorry, my mouse has taken on a life of its own. So first of all, this is for us as teachers. Think about the timing of a writing assessment after the original coursebook activity. Now, you might want to do it immediately. That's normally, you want stuff to bed down a bit and you want them to come back to it, and you don't want them to be overdoing something. They come back to it, it's familiar. Yes, I know this. So just think carefully about when are you going to assess that, when are you going to use that activity for assessment. It might be a week after, for example. We've said before, you must allow lots of planning time. And do you know what? It's so common with writing for people to think that you plan writing by writing. For young learners, we plan writing orally. That's the starting point, okay? So I think that's really, really important. Let them talk about it. Let them plan everything orally. And that's what I put. Always prepare orally. You might go, you're talking about copying. I mean, you might have a situation where you go through the whole task in class. You kind of almost give them the answer. That doesn't matter. Remember, it's about success here and them feeling they can do it. Make sure you give them improvement chances before they start writing. Now, what I mean by that is, let's say they've done a bit of oral planning with one partner or in a group, share it with the class or put them with another partner or group so that they can get better ideas and more more improvement before they have to go into writing. They might not use everything, but they've had a lot of stimulus for it. Always agree with the learners what you're going to assess, so they are clear what you're focusing on, so that when you give them feedback, they understand what that feedback means, okay? We've said this, give them repeat chances of success. So a week later, you might want to do it again, or you might want them to do it at home again to become in their portfolio. It's really important they have a visual of success, something they've done. And then I would say, finally, make sure you feedback holistically. So don't worry about that spelling mistake. Focus on the writing purpose, because remember, cognitively, we're sort of shifting them along, from where their first language is here. And writing is a really particular cognitive stretch where we have to focus on the writing skill rather than the minutiae, as it were. So I think that is everything from me. I don't know, Emily, if you're coming back on board to talk to everyone, but thank you very much for listening, everybody. And as I say, I'm not setting things in stone. I just hope we've discussed some ideas that you can that you can apply to your own things.
Thank you, Elaine. That was such a great presentation. I hope you all took away some practical tips for assessing writing for your young learners. We do have a second session. It will be later on today at 4 p.m. Eastern Time, 9 p.m. United Kingdom time, where Elaine is. So definitely let your colleagues know if they weren't able to join us for this session. We'd love to have them on that one. Elaine, we do have about 5 minutes. I'm wondering if we can go through a few of the questions that were asked in the Q&A box.
Yeah.
There's one specifically from someone asking about, can you shed some light on developing rubric categories for paragraph writing? Specifically, if we want to assess learners' improvement on writing, maybe for about 5 to 6 months span of time.
Yes, I think the first thing we've got to get straight here is, what do we mean by rubric? It's very interesting. I don't know, you're all around the globe. In American English, rubric is what we would call assessment criteria. And when in English, when we say rubric, we mean the instructions. So I think my first thing is I've got to understand where the question is there. Is it the assessment criteria, do you think? No, I can't see the question, so.
Yeah, it's from an anonymous attendee, so feel free to write back in the chat, anyone, if you pose that question.
Yeah, yes, it's yes, I'm not sure I can answer that, I'm afraid, till I understand what the parameters are.
Yeah. I'll dismiss that one. Let me just see if we have
I just want to reiterate that point as well that, you know, has come up about copying, because it seems to be more prevalent with written work than anything else. But I would be, you know, we live in changing times, don't we? That there's everybody's copying everything from all over the place. So you know, content as well as in class. And I'm not, I think, obviously, if you've got a child who is constantly copying and you're worried about their progress, you would manage that differently. But I think a bit of copying here and there is not, is not to come down too hard on, because as I say, they learn and get confidence from each other. And I think if the kids are going to copy, I'd encourage them to do swap copying. So, oh, you're good at spelling, so I'll copy your spelling, and you're good at grammar, so I'll copy your grammar. So see if you can get them to, again, get the collaboration going and do swapping.
Great. So we're just about at the wrap up time. So I think we'll hold there for any questions. But I also want everyone to know that we will have another webinar on this topic coming in the springtime. So just stay tuned for that. And if you are looking for any other previous webinars from Elaine, if you'd like to see some of her other sessions, they all are on our archive of webinars on the website, and you can watch the recordings there. So definitely be sure to check them out, and we hopefully see you at another one in the future. As you see up on the screen now, several of the examples used today were from Look, which is a 7-level series for young learners of English. I'm going to put the link if you'd like to learn a little bit more about Look into the chat box right now.
Shall I move that?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Great. But yeah, if you'd like to learn about Look, you can go to the website, or definitely contact your local National Geographic Learning representative. Elaine was a course consultant for Look. Great, and just last but not least, we hope you join us again soon for another webinar. We have several upcoming, and then as I said earlier, we do have another session of this same webinar later on today for anyone who missed it. So be sure to tell your colleagues, and follow our blog. Be sure to follow us on social and be part of our teaching community. So thank you all for spending an hour of your time with us. I know you're all very busy as teachers. And thank you so much, Elaine.
Say goodbye.
I'm going to direct everyone to a feedback survey now. We'd love to hear what you thought, and we hope we see you again soon. Happy teaching, everyone.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.